All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody here, and I'm happy that we had such a good turnout, and you've come to find out a little bit more about water here in the San Luis Valley and actually throughout the state of Colorado. So I think this is going to be an interesting thing for everybody. So I would like to introduce our new state engineer, Jason Ullmann. Jason is, I think, about 4 months into the job as state engineer and as the director of the Division of Water Resources. And but Jason has a lot of experience with water resources in the past. He's worked in the water resources field for about 20 years. Not all of that in the Division of Water Resources, but for the past about 14 years, he's worked for the Division of Water Resources in various roles. One of those, he was the assistant division engineer in Division 4, which is in Montrose, and that's on the Gunnison River Basin. So he's got field experience and experience with looking at ditches out in the field and water rights and fields. And so I think that's very valuable. And then for the past several years, he's actually been the assistant state engineer, the deputy state engineer for the state of Colorado, and has gotten a lot of, I think, good experience from that side of the Division of Water Resources. And so now he's the state engineer. Jason has a degree in civil engineering from Colorado State University. Go Rams. So, and so please help me welcome Jason Ullmann. I guess you can.
Yeah, I want to see if we can take my leg there. I'm going to introduce Nathan Coombs, who many of you, I'm sure know. Nathan is a fourth generation farmer from La Jera and has been a long-term member of the Basin Roundtable and is currently the chair of the the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So we're very pleased to have Nathan joining us tonight. Here. Okay, can everybody hear okay? Jason's been on the job for 3 months now, 4 months. I've been on the job for a week. So I am very much learning about what's been going on here in the basin, and I have a lot to learn, obviously. So I appreciate feedback and guidance as things go along, and look forward to working with many of you. So tonight I've put together a number of questions to ask our two panelists here. We'll talk for about a half an hour-ish or so, and then there'll be time for question and answer from all of you. And I think that's when you can ask those really nitty-gritty questions that might be particular to your particular sub-district or interest here. So I wanted to start off, Jason, question for you here. In the press release announcing your new role, Dan Gibbs, the executive director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, explained that your position is, and these are his words, charged with the difficult task of shepherding our state's precious water to users within the state and through our interstate compacts and decrees, while balancing the increasing needs of outdoor recreation, wildlife, and managing the impacts of climate change. That's a rather tall order. There's a lot of things to do there. So I wonder if you could,
right?
Yeah, comment a little bit about how you see yourself and in the division office trying to negotiate all these different interests.
Sure. So thank you for inviting me, Paul. I'm glad to be here to talk about water. Obviously, as state engineer, my primary role as state engineer, the position was created in 1881, so it's one of the oldest positions. It's not quite as old as the water commissioner position, so we have some water commissioners here. That position was created in 1879 after the state put in the Constitution the prior appropriation system as the legal framework by which we were going to manage water in the state of Colorado, in a state where we have scarce water resources. We realized there was realization from the legislature that just enacting a prior appropriation system and saying that somebody with a earlier right is senior and somebody with a later right is junior doesn't mean that people are going to always comply with the prior appropriation system. And so they enacted legislation following that in 1879 and 1881 to create essentially the positions that my office manages to administer the prior appropriation system in the state of Colorado. So I think primarily my duty as state engineer is to continue to steward that system, make sure that we are complying with it. Now, the question about all of these, back in the late 1800s, the court could only adjudicate water rights for agricultural or irrigation purposes. And in the early 1900s, legislation was passed that allowed the courts to adjudicate water rights for municipal and industrial purposes. And as we've grown and societal values have changed, in the 70s, we get the in-stream flow program, and later you get recreational in-channel diversions. So I think, part of managing that system, because my job is a little bit, it's not prescribed per se, but it is in the sense that we have a set of laws that the legislature passes that our office enforces. And we do that through rules, promulgating rules sometimes, which the people in the valley here are well aware of, our irrigation season and groundwater rules here in the valley. But primarily we're operating based upon how that system works. So you can now get water rights for these other uses, for environmental and recreational uses. And that's how we manage it. Now, is that easy? I'm going to tell you no, because as more and more water rights are decreed for more different and creative things throughout the state of Colorado, our water commissioners, they have a really difficult job of shepherding water to different users. And if you have a system that was used to dry up points in multiple places, for instance, because that's where it was dried up to supply water to ag interests, industrial interests. And now you have environmental flows that need to go past those dry up points. That's not an easy task. It requires probably more infrastructure, probably more measuring, so that we're not asking them to go tell somebody that a certain amount of water needs to go by their head gate without knowing that that's actually the case. So,
yeah, well, so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit maybe about just kind of the approach then of working with water users on all these different kinds of needs, and then maybe talking a little bit about your vision, I guess, for managing Colorado's and the basin's water down the road.
Sure. So I guess the first question is in terms of how do we do that? Well, we manage the system with all of these on the ground. I think our staff, we have about 270 staffed in total in the Division of Water Resources. And those staff, 120 or so of them are water commissioners on the ground throughout the state of Colorado. They know what's going on the ground. They know the water users. They know the priority system, whether that includes a environmental right, ag rights primarily, or on the Front Range, there's a lot more municipal augmentation plans and things like that. They're the ones managing that. So that's going to continue to be the case. As the job gets more complex, because we have more, you can now, originally, like I said, at the late 1800s, you could get a water right for irrigation. Then we have municipal. Now, most of our court cases involve complicated changes of water rights from ag to municipal, changes from even municipal to some other use, and or ag to in-stream flow. Those cases have a lot of engineering behind them that calculate consumptive use, because that's what you can change. So trying to manage that with tools, we are trying to create some better tools and models that help us to be able to calculate these things more accurately, so that our staff can do the job that they do amazingly right now. But as it gets harder, in some areas, we have staff managing hundreds of spreadsheets that have replacements and other things in them that they have to make sure are occurring. You might imagine that is difficult, you know, primarily in the 1800s, they were just on the stream out making sure that they knew what ditches were taking what amount of water. Now they're doing that, but they're also, this one ditch may have been changed 5, 6 different times for different uses, but they also still may be using it for ag. And so they're managing all of those things and they will continue to do that. I don't know if I answered the question or if I just went off on all the complexities that we have in the job that we do, but I think trying to develop better tools, and we are working with entities like the Water Conservation Board, which I am on as an ex officio member, and Nathan is on as a voting member, to get funding for new tools, for new measuring devices, so that we can remotely monitor what is going into head gates. That helps commissioners so that they don't have to drive out 3 times a day, maybe to a head gate. Those kinds of things are really helpful for us in managing the system as it becomes more complicated and integrates different uses.
Okay.
And that's generally statewide, but
Right. So in terms of the Rio Grande Basin,
yes.
what kind of specific things do you see like down the road that you're hoping to see here on the ground?
So there is some of that money. We received $1.8 million from the CWCB last year that is available as of July 1st to put telemetry on diversions. So there are some sites in our priority list in the Rio Grande Basin for that. The Rio Grande Basin is dominated. There's a lot of surface usage, but there's also a lot of groundwater usage in the Rio Grande, as everybody here knows. And so a lot of the management of that groundwater relies upon modeling. Our Rio Grande Decision Support System model that calculates depletions to the stream, that is used in annual replacement plans for subdistricts. That will continue to be the case. I think continuing to improve the model and make it better at accurately predicting what the depletions are is one goal. And for instance, right now we're working on what is called phase 7 of the model. And it includes 10 plus years of actual well metered pumping. The previous model that was used to create the current annual replacement plan or unit response functions that are included in the replacement plans, which is essentially defining the depletion to the river that's caused by a pumping of a well. Those were done with an estimated pumping. The model was estimating pumping based upon consumptive use. We now have 10, actually more like 12 years of pumping, actual metered pumping. So that's better data. We hope that produces a more accurate model and helps us manage, you know, the Rio Grande in general. That's the Rio Grande and the Republican are 2 basins that are, you know, not dominated solely by Republican, is pretty much solely well pumping. The Rio Grande has a combination of the 2, but well pumping is such a huge part that I, you know, would be remiss to not mention the model.
Yeah. So maybe we can shift to Nathan and you could talk maybe a little bit more about the work that you're doing with the CWCB and then the engineer's office. What are you seeing? What is kind of that relationship from your side of things?
So we're all under the Department of Natural Resources, kind of sister organizations, if you will. I mean, I think everybody would agree CWCB is the best water management organization, but well, we're the favorite because we hand out so much money. But
That's right.
you know, the working relationship is like Jason said, they're an ex officio member on the board, so there's input. There's some stability as far as the administration of water, but CWCB's role is more of ensuring that there's structure in place, policy. We don't get involved in making legislation or that, but we kind of interpret policy as far as how do we help make sure that there's adequate water for Colorado in the future, now and in the future, and all those uses like what you mentioned, your recreation, your municipal, industrial, the agriculture. And so the working relationship is not at all contentious. They're parallel tracks. Because all the water belongs to the state of Colorado, it takes different agencies to administer it different ways. We see ourselves more of helping maintain a lot of infrastructure, a lot of policy, as far as helping with coming up with concepts like alternative transferring methods to be able to do some creative things as growth in this state is inevitable. As the demand on that resource continues to build, we have to adapt. I think Jason did a great job of saying, just because we say first in time, first in right, doesn't mean everybody understands exactly how that's administered. And there's some nuances we have to work within. And CWCB kind of fits that role of helping fund good projects that are going to help Colorado have that water supply. And then also we are the ones that can officially hold an in-stream flow right in the state of Colorado. So we have that ability on behalf of the state of Colorado to manage those after the engineering and all that is done. So really it's different tracks, but for the same end, to make sure the water is available for Colorado now and in the future and all those uses.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure many people are familiar with some of the projects that CWCB has been funding here, but could you talk maybe about some of the more recent projects that
So,
Europe's funded?
there's a lot of them. I don't know if James was the first one to James Henderson, but I always attribute the saying to him was always, you can't manage what you can't measure. And so I know, like what Jason was saying, a lot of measurement has been going on, a lot of automation on head gates. We're doing a lot of rehabilitation of a lot of aging infrastructure on the Rio Grande and the canals, Swatch, all those. We're doing a lot of stream management plans. And I'd say back in 2000, there was a comprehensive plan done on the Rio Grande that kind of what spurred the formation of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. But I think the concept was valid. We all realized the benefit of planning our rivers better so that we weren't just putting out the hottest fires first, right? We were comprehensively looking at what we can do. And CWCB has been instrumental in funding those stream management plans so that the Swatch, the Kness, all these rivers can have a plan of how does everything work together, the riparian and the interconnectedness of the different several water rights, because we've noticed that if I fund one individual and they go in without a comprehensive look, sometimes we push unintended consequences downriver, whether it's erosion or whether it's an impact to someone else's water right or the diurnal affects them. So I think probably one of the most significant things is the comprehensive planning that CWCB has helped fund here. Not to mention, we've had a lot of big projects on a lot of the river head gates, the McDonald ditch. You've got all those up on the Rio Grande that are getting a lot of infrastructure built. You think of how old the water rights are in this valley. They're the oldest, right? You're starting in 1855 on. And so there's a lot of old headgate structures out there that it's not dereliction of maintenance. It's just, it's a lot. It's huge. And so then CWCB can come in and help and make sure that not only are our irrigators getting their water, that river is functioning properly, and then they don't have quite the difficulty paying the compact. So that's, I'd say, is probably some of our biggest highlights here in the valley, is maintaining proper river function and planning.
Sure. And is some of that money going toward dam maintenance? I don't know, in terms of that infrastructure, is that aging similar to some of the ditches, head gates?
Yeah,
the smaller
dams can get money. Platoro's got money to do lining on the top crest of the dam. They've helped with gates. They helped put in some of the money for purchasing Shaw Reservoir for the San Luis Valley Irrigation or Water Conservancy District. So I think anything infrastructure in the valley that's water related, somehow we fit it in. And I'll tell you, the staff at CWCB is phenomenal. They have their whole attitude is, how do we get to yes? So if you come with a project that maybe doesn't fit exactly into this program, staff really goes to work to say, okay, but what if we do it this way? What if we add this component? Then we can get you some funding, or maybe we partner this way. So yeah, I mean, we try not to leave anything out, whether it's canals, reservoirs, head gates, any of it, whatever we can do.
Sure. I'm curious to know a little bit more in terms of this basin and what maybe both of you see as kind of the unique qualities here. And Nathan, certainly with your work with CWCB and seeing what some of the other basins are doing. What do you see as some of the challenges here that are unique to the basin, and maybe where are some things that might be the example perhaps for some of the other basins to consider? Again, this is for both of you.
Okay. Got it.
Sure. Maybe I can start off and I'll say that if it was a popularity contest between DWR and CWCB, yeah, they might win. They give out money, we shut off people's water rights. So, but I don't know if that's the right metric to use to determine which is the best water agency in Colorado. But we do work very well together. Our commissioners and our staff and the division offices work with CWCB. And as Nathan said, we also inform them on, and that's part of my role as an ex officio member on the board, is offering advice on administration related issues. They're the policy. So when they're working on policy issues, offering input on that. But one of the unique things, I touched on it previously, is the combination of surface water and groundwater use in the valley. And I think that the local solution that this valley has chosen to move forward with creating sub-districts to manage sustainability. We also are the only basin that has a legislative mandate for creating a sustainable system, sustainable aquifer in Colorado. And it's fairly rare across the West, actually, to have that kind of a mandate for sustainability. So that is definitely unique. It's unique and a challenge, right? Because trying to figure out the metric there's a metric designated for that sustainability right now. Is that the right one? Those things are difficult to come up with because this is a very large basin. It produces a lot of ag, the economy in the valley relies heavily upon the ag that results from that aquifer. So I think that it is encouraging that this local solution, and hopefully that continues to be the case, was started here in the valley, and you're on one of those boards. So maybe you can comment more specifically on.
So I'd say when you ask what are the strengths, what are the challenges, I think Jason hit it. I mean, we're struggling with our groundwater, surface water nexus, but I look at our 10 years ago, our census said we had between 40 45,000 people here in the valley. And the most recent one said we have between 40 and 45,000 people in the valley. So,
Yeah.
I mean, call it a strength. It can also be a weakness, right? We don't have a lot of influx of these big industries and money and concepts, but also we don't have a lot of influx of that pressure from municipalities and industry. We get caught in a little bit of, because most of the farms and ranches are so multi-generational, we make sure that we don't share water with so-and-so because remember what their grandpa did, and that kind of hinders a little bit of our movement forward. And as we try to do these sub districts, and we really have to think outside the box of how are we going to in a very delicate and controlled method change water from what it typically went to be able to cover these depletions and meet the sustainability and recognize the heritage, the cultural aspects. I mean, it's not just simply we've got a big fat checkbook line up. There's a lot of other things. These are small communities that depend on the economy of that local ag industry. And so we really have to step lightly. I look around the room and I bet it'd be surprising how many of us are all related to each other, right? And so there's no decision we make that's in a vacuum. And so I think that's one of our challenges. But then there again, because we are a close-knit group, it's a strength because we can sit around and talk. And like Jason said, we have these sub-district boards of managers and the Rio Grande management, and still at this gas station we'll run into each other and we can talk about it, and over the fence and across the ditch we can talk about these things, where I don't know if in these larger basins that are facing similar problems they can have that more intimate discussion on the impacts of decisions these boards are making. So
yeah. Well, Jason, you were working in the Colorado basin for a number of years. I mean, I guess, what did you see there perhaps in terms of how well collaboration was working, or was it able to move forward in a way that Nathan's talking about?
I think it's just different, right? So the interesting thing about my job now, covering not just one basin, but looking at the whole state is how different every basin in the state is. And it's actually different even in sub basins in each of the different divisions. So we have 7 divisions in Colorado, and Division 3 is the Rio Grande, Division 1 is the South Platte, 2 is the Arkansas, 4 is the Gunnison, and 5 is the main stem Colorado, 6 is the Yampa White Green, and the 7 is all the tributaries to the San Juan. And there's just a lot of difference. I think that there's a lot of collaboration going on in a lot of the basins because of this, Nathan mentioned the supply and demand imbalance that we have. We're because of a need for it. But it's just different here, I think, in the valley, partly because of that interrelationship between groundwater and surface water. In the Colorado, there's very low reliance on groundwater usage in the Colorado, in all the 4 Colorado River Basin divisions. There are wells there, but they're not, there's not really a confined aquifer system in most of the West Slope. So, or a significant unconfined system in the rest of the West Slope. So it's just different. It's primarily surface water driven. And there are areas in those basins where there are calls every year. And then there's areas in those basins where there's calls every 10 years. And there's some where there's not calls or haven't been calls ever. And so it's just very different the way that they're managed around the state.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense as state engineer, in terms of where Colorado fares, in terms of some of the other Western states that are, in the ways in which their engineers are managing water? We have this, very comprehensive water plan that's been put together. So I don't know if you have a sense of that, if there's conversations that happen periodically with, hey, Utah, what are you doing there? Or Wyoming, but where do we kind of sit in terms of, I think, making significant steps in better stewarding our water?
So this is there's an easy question, because I would say that Colorado is ahead of pretty much all of the Western states, including, one that gets mentioned, California. Because we have recognized for many years the connection between groundwater and surface water since 1965, when the Groundwater Management Act was passed, and then in 1969 when the Water Rights Determination Act was passed. We have recognized and managed those two things together. Some states like California, I've gotten phone calls from reporters where they've wanted to talk to us about what are we doing to manage groundwater and surface water together. California has passed this great law. Well, we passed it 50 years ago. So now, does that mean that it's easy or that we figured it all out? No, but I think that we are probably ahead. Most of the other states look to us. In fact, we had a call with the state of Montana a couple of weeks ago to talk about our database system and how we track water rights and usage in the state of Colorado, because they're looking to implement a similar system in the state of Montana. So I think that we are ahead of them, partly because we've had this full adjudication system. A lot of states aren't done even adjudicating all their water rights yet. The state of Utah is still getting through basin adjudications, and we have a fully developed water court system and have for many, many years. And so I'm glad as the state engineer, because as I've taken this new role, I've very quickly met lots of folks from New Mexico and learned that this New Mexico state engineer is still working on adjudicating water rights and making decisions. I'm glad that's not my job. So to answer the question.
Yeah, well, maybe just a follow up, in our State of the Basin symposium this past spring, there was a lot of focus on tribal water rights and the prior and paramount rights with the Native American pueblos down in New Mexico. I'm wondering if maybe the both of you could just take a moment to talk a little bit about the relationship that the state of Colorado has to the tribe. I know there's a representative from the tribes out in the CWCB. And again, Colorado seems to be ahead of the curve in some of those ways in quantifying those water rights. But if you have any comments on that.
If you want to finish that one, and I'll start. Yours will be more factual.
If you want me to start, I will grant you start. But
I'll start.
okay.
So for the tribal issues and the prior and paramount water, in the Rio Grande, it's not an issue. Within Colorado, we don't have any of those issues for how we administer there. But now you get on the West Slope, and it's more relevant. You know, you've got the Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute tribes, and they do have water rights. However, the source of their water isn't directly out of the Colorado. They do make their claims that way. I do think that Colorado is they're, if they're not leading it, they're at the front of the pack, recognizing a responsibility there. There's a lot of things to work out of where does that physical wet water come from? But I do think for us, at least on the Rio Grande, we're not bound up by that. But on the Colorado, it is statewide, it is an issue. And I think that's something that's still to be seen, because I think there's so many issues of how are we going to break out now that the Colorado is a little bit under some negotiations on some operating guidelines, and where do those tribes come in? I think now in New Mexico, they're going to be able to assert their claims in that state, and that might affect that state's ability with the compact. But for Colorado, I think we're fairly safe right now.
I think
Safe being a relative word, I don't know.
the only thing I would add to that is that Colorado was one of the first to settle the native water rights in Colorado for the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute tribe. So those two tribes, those are the only two in Colorado that they have settled water rights. Now, you'll hear stories of, in the Colorado River in Arizona, there's significant water rights that have not been settled with the Navajo Nation and other nations in Arizona and New Mexico. But in Colorado, the water rights for the tribes are settled. So, and then like I think, Paul, you mentioned, we do have, representative on CWCB. The vice chairman is Lorelei Cloud from the Southern Ute tribe, which is great to have that perspective at, that high level of policymaking with the state.
Right. Well, maybe we could shift our attention to the recent Supreme Court case, Texas versus New Mexico and Colorado. Thoughts, comments on that ruling, and how do you see that impacting kind of the West more broadly, and then us here in the Rio Grande Basin?
Let me just start this one. He actually was there, so for the argument, but the thing I'll say about the case, it was the decision or the opinion was a little surprising. But I think that the key is that essentially what they decided, or the opinion says, is that the federal government has there's an interrelationship between the project, Elephant Butte, Rio Grande project in New Mexico, and the compact. And because of that interrelationship and the fact that they allowed the federal government to get into the case in 2018, and because they asserted a claim that the states couldn't get rid of that claim by signing a consent decree with the three of them without federal government. But that didn't make any decision on the veracity of any claims or the actual quantitative nature of the claims. It basically said that the federal government has a claim that they can continue to litigate. And so because what's going to happen now is that case is remanded essentially back to the states, is that we are going to be back in the litigation. So because it's the subject of future litigation, I can't really comment anymore on that, on the impact what the resulting will be. I can say that the consent decree that was signed had no impact to how Colorado manages or delivers water under the compact. It was primarily related to New Mexico and their administration of wells. But what the result of any future litigation and discussions with the states and the federal government will be, I can't tell you what that will be yet. So, Nathan?
So I would agree. It's okay. So I got to back up a little bit. So if anybody in our family ever had to go do something similar to this, we used to joke and say, well, if you can't make us proud, at least don't embarrass us. And I'm walking a thin line right now, I'll tell you. You start talking about the Supreme Court decision. It's interesting because, like Jason said, the Supreme Court allowed the federal government in as having an interest in that decision. The issue is, I think, for our upper states is we're looking at how's it going to affect deliveries, and are we going to be able to stay autonomous and sovereign in our administration of that compact, right? Our fear is do you let the federal government in to potentially sway how deliveries are made and all that? So those of us on the ground of potential of having your head gate closed to pay the compact because the federal government wanted to administer different, we kind of got emotionally connected, where I think Jason did a good job of saying the facts of the case are slightly different, that the 3 states finally were able to come to an agreement of how they could administer some of those issues in New Mexico. The Department of Justice, the federal government, on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation, thought, no, that now forces us to manage in a way we never agreed to manage Elephant Butte and that project. Okay, so now here's where I step across the line. So I got to make sure you guys understand. Now this is where we're talking is just Nathan Combs. The difference of administration would have been whether you release 110 CFS or 150 CFS, right? I mean, it wasn't like we were asking them to come in on Sundays and every other weekend, you know. It wasn't a fundamental change of operations, but they asserted their claim, I think, because it sets a very interesting precedent when we've got a lot of conflict on the Colorado.
Right, yeah.
We have a lot of things going on there trying to renegotiate. What are going to be the operating guidelines, and how are we going to get that system in balance from how much is being drawn out of the lower basin, and what's the obligation of the upper basin states? Do they have to curtail, even though we're not using our full apportionment? Do we have to take an even deeper cut so they don't have to? I mean, what are going to be those negotiations? And now you've got Colorado, which I agree with Jason. I think we're at the forefront of administration and management. But now you've got Arizona, who, forgive me if any of you are from Arizona, they got a lot of work to do down there. They subjugated their water rights to get CAP. And so now they're in a tough spot with California, who's asserting a call on that river against their water. So there's a whole lot of fighting because none of them have maintained that autonomy and that sovereignty of managing their right. So the Bureau of Reclamation comes in as an authority. It's really clouded the ability for those states, in our view. How are we going to manage this? And it's interesting that I don't like the precedent of a non-signator to a compact having much input at all. Not that I'm against any kind of endangered species or any riparian things. I just think that they need to work through the proper channel. And to me, that guiding document needs to remain the compact and let that remain a little more simple. So like Jason says, we were at the Supreme Court. I thought we argued well. I think we missed some valid points of really, we weren't asking for much real change of how the project would be administered. But keep in mind, the entire compact was drafted to protect that project. So you get into that chicken or the egg discussion pretty quick, but it was, I think for us, they really didn't rule against us. I don't think they just didn't agree with us like we thought they would. So we still have some work to do. So.
And are there, I mean, I guess, obviously, are there some concerns like Nathan expressed about its impact on other compacts? We have 9 compacts with surrounding states in the state of Colorado. So maybe yes, but I guess the main point I'd say is that Colorado is committed to advocating for our rights under those compacts, and the fact that the compacts are a treaty between the states, not a treaty between the states and the federal government. And so advocating that is the case, and that the states have primary control under the McCarran Amendment over how we manage our water rights. And that includes the state engineer's ability to manage compliance. The state engineer's role, as Paul mentioned at the beginning, is responsible to ensure through our staff around the state that we comply with the compacts that we've signed. And that's not going to change.
Well, I don't know if any of you saw the recent PBS show that they had on the Colorado just the other night, and they had Commissioner Tuden on there from Bureau of Reclamation, and she seemed to suggest that very much she wanted the states to, kind of figure these things out. But I guess we'll see.
She didn't really answer the question.
Yeah, oh yeah, she in a perfect kind of political way dodged that one really well. Well, let's jump perhaps to another somewhat contentious issue, and that is water exportation from the San Luis Valley. And as you know, and as you all know, that there's been a long history of various schemes to move water out of the San Luis Valley. I guess, where do we kind of stand with that right now? what's your office's role? What can we do here to prevent that from happening? Obviously, a lot of people are very concerned
Yeah.
about those threats.
I don't know. I guess I can go first. I understand definitely the concern. Like I, kind of talked about in the answer to the first question is our role with the Division of Water Resources is fairly prescribed. We manage the prior appropriation system. We can do that through rules and things. We don't have any applications for the current version of this project. And so there's nothing to really comment on in terms of whether that project is viable or not, or how they're gonna push forward with it. But in Colorado, there is you have a private property right. If you own a water right, that's a right to use the public's resource for a beneficial purpose. It's a private property right that you can convey and that you can change. And that is the case in all basins of the state. And so, but we don't have an application for this project right now, so I can't really comment on whether it's viable, what's going to go forward. What we will do if we did get an application for such a project is we would evaluate the injury. That's our job, is to ensure that there's no injury to other water rights, and comment to the court. We have a expert advisory role with the court as far as consulting with the water referee. And so we would participate like we do in any other court case. I know that's not, that's not an answer that maybe you want to hear, but that is our role, and that's where our authority is.
Yeah, I'd say it's difficult when you live here, you feel that emotion of it and you see the community impact and all of that. But to have confidence in your own water rights, you have to recognize that the law is the law. Like it or hate it, it is what it is. And so I think what our job is here is to evaluate the reality of the threat. We watch it really close. The Rio Grande Water Conservation District has people watching that send out emails of any updates that happen in Douglas County or on the Front Range that mentions any of that. And we try to see more of what's the political movement on that side. I'll tell you right now, it's not dead. The people in charge of that are trying to insert their people into different water boards and different advisory roles to the commission of Douglas County to have more impact on the water plan. What it comes down to, though, is there are some very large hurdles to overcome. Like Jason said, until somebody files an actual application, there's not a lot that the state can do because they have to look at it on the factual engineered basis. But we as a community can look at where are the appropriate places to look at conservation easements, where are appropriate places to look at ways that we can legitimately and ethically protect our water. I don't advocate for sharpening pitchforks and lighting torches and storming castles. That rarely does much long-term good. But I do think that as long as we're aware of what's happening, what they're doing, I think our better approach is kind of stay a little bit under the radar and keep moving forward. And we talk about it at the round table some, we talk about it at other meetings. So just keep your ear to the ground. We're not unaware of them. The threat isn't quite as imminent as you'd think because that's a lot of money they're wanting to spend. And while Colorado is fairly progressive or liberal in their thinking, they never have been that way with taxes. And so there's some security in that, isn't there? When you, even it's the Front Range, they don't want to take our water. We've gone over there, we've met with and very few people, this is some bad actors. So I don't want to vilify the Front Range in any way. There's just some bad actors trying to make a whole lot of money off of middlemaning some water. I don't know if they have the financial and political horsepower to get it done, but it's always a threat. You come to the valley and you see, like this time of year when you see all of these fields and they're green and they're lush and you see the sprinklers running and so much of our water is so visible, right? The Rio Grande and the Kines, the Swatch, San Luis Creek, all of them running, and you see this vibrant and, in their opinion, abundance, you become a target. I mean, but I think as the cooler heads prevail and the actual fact check, they realize It's not that easy. Keep in mind the injury component, right? So one thing that we do have going for us are the rules governing groundwater withdrawals in Division 3. How are you going to pull that much water out and maintain the sustainability requirement that the law calls for? That's a very steep curve. I mean, that's tough. So I'm not telling you relax, go to bed, act like it's not happening, but keep it in the proper perspective. People are watching it. We're staying on top of it, but I don't know that it's as imminent as maybe their investors wish it was.
Great, thank you. Well, this is probably a good time to open it up to the audience for some question and answer. And I anticipate there may be quite a few questions. So if you could keep your question and comments focused so that as many people as possible can participate. So I think the mics, they're set loud enough. We should be able to pick up sound. So just kind of speak up and we should be good. Leroy.
Question for Nathan Moore, but I think it's appropriate for all of us to understand. The Rio Grande Basin Roundtable is a really important way of getting people together to look at water, natural resources issues, and so forth. So what's it, and for the sake of everybody that doesn't know too much about what you've done with that, Nathan, what is the role overall? And how has it been able to bring the different entities together to work with, whether it be the Travel Unlimited, all the different competing entities for water? What has it done, and how does it work with the Colorado Water Conservation Board?
So the question was kind of the function and the makeup of the basin roundtables. So every basin by statute was roundtables organized. West George saw a need for CWCB basically to be able to reach a little lower on their projects, to be able to affect the basins on a more grassroots level than some of what their projects bills were doing and some of their higher level grants were doing. And so the roundtables were established in 05. Is that right, Robert? Do you remember this? So in 05, they were established. And so the function is you get all the vested parties to the table. And there isn't a hierarchy. Everybody comes in with the same value, whether you're fish and wildlife, whether you're agriculture, whether you operate a reservoir, whether you operate a conservancy district. And we sit at the table and kind of basically we prioritize and judge projects that we deem are the most valuable for our basins. What the South Platte is dealing with is not what we're dealing with. And so we've really tried to work hard to make sure the discussions are available to everyone can participate. If you don't sit on the roundtable, you're still welcome to come, but we want to hear the impacts. I come up with a project saying I want to do X, Y, and Z on the river, and by heck, we're going to clear cut these willows and get this crap out of the way so we can get water to the irrigators. And then somebody that has a more biological sense than I do comes in and says, whoa, 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 we're not cutting all the trees. We're not, it helps balance us off. And so I would say, as far as functionality, the Rio Grande Roundtable is very functional. We have a lot of people that come to the table. We listen to everybody. Keep in mind, just because we hear you doesn't mean we agree with you, right? So there is a balance there. But the second Tuesday of every month at 2:00 at the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, Amber Pacheco was just made our new Basin Roundtable chair, and she's going to do a phenomenal job. But this is also a place where you come and talk about projects, needs, things that we can help you with. There's a methodology where you come in and bring your project, give us a preview. We say, you really ought to partner with, like Leroy was saying, you ought to partner with Trout Unlimited here. We can spend our dollars a little more effectively if we have more partners and it's doing more work. We try to get all those projects done that fit the basin. Colorado Water Plan grants do not require roundtable approval, but it's recommended that you come and get a letter of support just to show that it fits what the basin is doing. And so again, it's the second Tuesday of every month at 2:00 at the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. And if you want to get to the place where the people that actually do know what they're doing sit, it's there, right? You've got the managers of the districts, the managers of the reservoirs, Division of Water Resources is always there to make a report. this is where you can go and get legitimate questions and bring up legitimate concerns and find out what are some options. So I hope that answered the question.
And at a basic level on the water plan, has been mentioned and tossed around the roundtables. I was at the Gunnison one for 11 years. They are the grassroots level also of the water plan, creating the basin implementation plans that create lists of projects and things that they want to prioritize. So that is kind of where it's at the grassroots level in each basin.
Yeah, real.
Yeah, for state engineer, given your pathway to your position now and the fact that we're here at the university and the Salzar Center's role in providing education, what might you say to people who are looking at a career in water, looking ahead, and what kind of people, expertise or learning would you want to bring into your staff in the future?
That's a good question. The first answer to that is, please come work for us. We have jobs advertised all the time throughout the state because there's a shortage of people to do the engineering and technical work that we do to manage the prior appropriation system. And so one, there's job security. In this job, we have more work than we have people to do it. But as far as educating yourself and training, there's lots of good programs around the state. Obviously, I'm partial to CSU for water engineering. I'm sitting here at Adams State. I'm not as familiar with the programs at Adams State, but I'm sure there are programs here where you can learn water management and natural resources management skills that would be helpful to us. We hire people that measure stream at the state of Colorado. So we have hydrographers that measure the stream and keep gauges running, which you can't manage, which you can't measure. I think that's been attributed to many people, including James Henderson here. So it's true though. And so all the way up to division engineers who are making decisions on a basin level. So, and then there's obviously jobs with conservancy districts, with conservation districts, there's no shortage of jobs in the water world, and it's only going to get more complicated and more in need with the fact that we have a decreasing supply. I mean, as you saw this year in the Rio Grande, you had over 100% of snowpack at the peak. You got 75%. Is that the term? Is that about the number? Close. 75% of runoff in the river off of 105% snowpack. That's been pretty consistent around the state, has been happening, which means something, there's something that has changed. The soil moisture is lower. Getting less runoff from the same amount of snowpack is a problem. So that means more potential conflict, more curtailments by our office because there's less water. We have to curtail more people, which, so managing that scarce resource is just getting more difficult. So I went kind of off longer to answer your question.
And I'll make a plug for some of the programs here at Adams.
Thank
at
you.
at the end.
And
So,
yeah.
yeah.
And I should have researched. I have been slightly overwhelmed, but anyway.
Sure. Understandable. Other questions?
How do you guys, if at all, interact with the legislature in terms of giving them perspective on new ideas about law and stuff? I have found I feel I'm a bit challenged by law because my family has a ditch which is now running dry because of a low water table. I mean, our water right is still showing up on Saguache Creek, but it doesn't make it to our land through the ditch because the water table has fallen low enough, so the ditch isn't carrying it. So we looked into ways to make the ditch function. And not only is that expensive, but a lot of the things have adverse environmental impacts, like plastic, is going to end up in the ocean. It's not been made, what I mean? Plastic And I could go through a whole list, but anyway, I won't. But the point is, this, sometimes the laws about adverse possession and stuff. Would someone else take our water if we can't get it into a pump well, or if we can't get it through our ditch? And are we then forced to buy this new technology that has adverse environmental impacts? Some of this is because of a lot of the laws were made a long time ago, like laws about adverse possession, which set a certain number of years. And one wonders how relevant those years are in a circumstance like this. Yeah, and I imagine there's a
So-
lot of stuff like this. This is just a small example. And
So-
the law maybe needs to be tweaked a little bit, maybe not, but do you guys go back and talk to boards?
So to answer the first question, which is what role does the Division of Water Resources have with the legislature? So we aren't policy setters, so we're not typically running bills unless we're trying to fix some well permitting, issue, because we do approve all well permits in the state of Colorado, but we do get consulted by the legislature and their Water Resources and Ag Review Committee on a regular basis. In my short time, have been there twice to offer testimony on proposed bills and their potential impact to water rights and the water rights system in Colorado. We also prepare fiscal notes for every bill that has potential impact to us in terms of additional staffing that would be needed. Is it going to cost additional money? So yes, we do have a role in legislation in terms of educating the legislators on the impacts of potential bills, for sure. That answers the question. I don't know about CWC.
So for CWCB, the board is it's all those that are voting members are governor appointees. And so we don't get into the lawmaking legislation. We do help enforce some of the policies for what are conservation plans, what are approved uses of water, but we don't go very close to that line just because our job is a little more neutral in representing the entire state on a very broad basis. Doesn't say that legislation doesn't impact us, but we have some by our formation, we have some obligations, and we try to not abdicate those to where the legislature thinks they should come in and do that, but we try to stay pretty neutral in that realm. Since if the governor wanted to wipe the slate clean and start with his that you can just imagine the problem. And so
Or anyway, even into the legislature.
it is. And the it's a difficulty, right? Because it's hard to make a law that only cuts one way. It really is. And it's very difficult to make a law that only applies to one basin without giving kind of a precedent for another basin. And so Colorado water law is a very tricky walk to manage when you're talking about making some new rules or new things. I think the local solution is always the best. I think it is.
Through that. But what I was trying to say was that some of the laws were made a long time ago, and then things have just gotten more and more complex, especially with environmental problems. So one wonders sometimes if they need a little change, but I know what you're saying.
I mean, maybe the other comment is that every year there's a number of water bills introduced in the legislature by the Water Resources and Ag Review Committee to handle changes to the prior appropriation system that are necessary to make it more flexible. That's how we have some of these new uses. And so I think that even while the basis of that system was instituted a long time ago, it has been pretty flexible in handling things. As far as the adverse possession, because I don't want anybody to be overly concerned about adverse possession. That's not really something that we see very often happening, where people are claiming any kind of adverse possession of a water right, like they would of a piece of land that's been used for 18 years. There's statute on abandonment that our office manages every 10 years that is intended to basically also keep the system flexible, because if you have water rights that have been out there for a long time and haven't been used, and you have people that have come in the 30 years, say, that the water right hasn't been used, that have been used to the river without that water right there, it's hard to then let that person, especially if it's a large water right, come back in and just start using it again, right? Because now these folks have been relying upon that supply. And so that's maybe more typical of water rights going away, would be through the abandonment process.
Don't be shy. Yeah, Holland.
What would New Mexico need to do to get their act together? Better. There's this. Well, yes, what would they?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't. None of us have enough time and nobody wants to hear me talk that much. It's just a different state with different pressures, they have some difficulties when you've got some sub-basins that legitimately can claim that they've been using water since the 1600s, and then how do you firm that up when that many generations have passed? But they've got to just kind of knuckle down, I think, and keep pushing forward to try to get all their water rights perfected. I think that's just their difficulty right now. But then again, you got the Native American issues. They have a lot of tribes to deal with. It's not a simple solution of elect the right person or kick out the right person. There's a lot of processes to go through for them.
Hopefully you president will all the way to El Paso. That's the problem.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's something that they'll be dealing with. I mean, the consent decree was going to require and some form of whatever ends up happening under litigation will probably require some administration of groundwater in New Mexico, which has not happened in the past. So they have not curtailed groundwater users like we have in Colorado. Another reason why I say that, Colorado is ahead in terms of our management of water in the state. And so talk about, not ever doing something like that and then having to set up a program where you're going to curtail. They actually were here. We had representatives from New Mexico here. Craig and Nathan were at some meetings to talk about how we do it in Colorado, because they're going to have to set up systems to do that in New Mexico, regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court litigation.
Yeah. And the compact meetings will be here next year. Is that right?
I believe so, yes. I'm looking at Craig because he knows more.
Yeah.
District 1, there's the new plan of water management that's been sent in, and then the lawsuits followed. Where does that leave everything?
Well, I think where it leaves currently for the annual replacement plans in Subdistrict 1, that they will still be relying on the previous plan of water management. Correct. Okay, just checking. I gotta make sure. If I see him going like this, 4 months, remember, I'm gonna use that new state engineer thing for a little while. But that is supposed to go to trial in 2026. And so hopefully after that trial, we'll have an idea of what that new plan of water management looks like and if it's approved. So we worked, the district filed that plan of water management, that then we approved the groundwater management plan as part of that. And so they're taking the state and division engineers and the district to court over that plan of water management. And it's early 2026, correct? So we'll be working towards that. And obviously, since that's the subject of litigation, I can't really comment a whole lot more on the plan itself, but suffice it to say, it's 1-for-1 surface water replacement of groundwater depletions to result in bringing the aquifer up. so that we can reach a sustainable level. Or so that the valley can, the sub-district can reach a sustainable level.
I might, if I might, Patrick.
Yeah.
Without getting into it's an interesting thing that the Division of Water Resources stuff they have administrative responsibility and authority. But ultimately, when there's an impasse, it has to go to court. And that makes it difficult because a lot of people want to say, well, why doesn't Craig just do this? And why doesn't Jason just do this? The court has, right? The water belongs to the state, and the court has to be able to balance that out of what's appropriate for either side. And this is one of those situations where it's just timing it's caught right now, but I think it's appropriate because I don't think anybody should be denied the ability to go to court or to defend themselves in court. So it's not a pretty time for Sub-District 1, but I think we're stuck because that's the path Colorado has.
Pat, looks like you want to ask something here?
Keep it going. There was recently an interjection of $30 million into the local budget to buy up farms. Do you see something like that coming up again in the future, Nathan or Jason, that maybe some additional monetary help to the San Luis Valley people coming?
I don't know. I mean, I think so. So the bill you're talking about was 2 years ago, Senate Bill 2228. And it dedicated 60 total $million to retire lands in the Republican and the Rio Grande. So it was split half and half. The Republican has this, they don't have a sustainability metric, but we have a resolution with the state of Kansas and Nebraska that requires us to retire 10,000 acres by the end of this year, which we thankfully have reached, because I don't want to start my first year as state engineer with curtailing all the wells in the Republican. That would be real fun. But the next goal is 2029. We must retire an additional 15,000 acres by 2029. That money was very helpful in incentivizing the retirement of lands. It also, just to be honest on challenges for the future, set a new kind of standard for how much are we paying for the retirement of lands. And so now that money, like Pat has indicated, is going away, are we going to be more is it going to be more challenging to get people to continue to agree to retire their lands? Possibly. Mostly the districts, the Rio Grande district, Amber's here down in this valley, and the Republican Conservation District in the Republican are partners with the state to help make that happen. Whether there's additional funds in either the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act available to do that, I don't know for sure. Maybe you have
I would agree. I think it's difficult. That was kind of a windfall with that amount of money that was floating around at the federal level. And then Senator Simpson was, is very successful in making the state a pass through to get that money down on the ground. I don't know if on a federal level, that kind of money will circulate again. I don't know if the public's appetite is big enough to do that again. Within the state of Colorado, CWCB doesn't have that kind of money. We go to the projects bill through the legislature for our funding. We also have severance tax. The gambling money has actually turned out, Proposition DD has made more money than we envisioned it would, which is a plus, but I don't know if we get that size of money rolling in again in the near future. I think we're going to have to start on some smaller funds to try to accomplish the same goal. I hope I'm wrong. That would be great. But just looking realistically down the road, I don't know if another 30 or 60 million is out there.
Yeah, maybe our last question here. Yeah.
To spin off of Pat's question, will the model be able to pick up what the pumps that have actually had permanent retirement and see as far as improvement to the aquifer? Because in my area, I can see it already. And I was just curious, when you talked about having more money to help the model do better things, is that something that is possible?
So I'm gonna say that yes, because the model has actual well pumping in it. So as we go through more years where those wells haven't been pumped, it'll automatically be reflected in the model because there'll be zero diversions at those wells, which will then, you know, the model is trying to replicate groundwater levels that we see in the monitoring wells. So you run the model and you hope to get a good calibrated model by replicating those well levels as close as you can. You're talking about modeling a 3,000 square mile valley in a model that is difficult, but it's probably one of the more complicated groundwater models in the country. And it's doing a pretty good job. So as we get better data, as wells are retired and they stop being used, that automatically gets included in the model. Does that answer your question?
Low injury, would that help to increase that or see that, you know, there's more water available in the stream?
So the model itself, the relationship we're looking for, you know, when we run the model is how closely are we replicating the levels? So the level itself, though, the actual condition on the stream is what determines actual depletions in the river, right? I mean, the depletions that you have to pay under your annual replacement plans are determined by the unit response functions that are developed through the model. So those, you have actual depletions and the model depletions, and the model, what we try to do is get the model to reflect actual conditions as best possible. So yes, I guess I could have answered that question quickly by saying yes, and instead I did the engineering thing and went off on a long answer. But yeah.
With your models, do you consider, as you're making different models and experimenting with them, possible connections between the underground aquifer and the one that's higher up? That there's what you call them. What do they call this? Confined in the unconfined. So I couldn't use the word.
Yes, there is a connection in the model recognized there through parameters that allow water to go between the two.
Well, that's probably a good stopping point for this evening. We thank our panelists, Jason, Nathan, and also Craig for being here. And just a plug for the Adams State water studies minor. There's a flag poster in the back. We have some flyers. Our two instructors for Water 101, Maya, and then Kevin somewhere in the back for 201. These courses are open to community members as well as students. And if you are interested and want to know more information, again, grab one of the cards in the back, get in touch with me, and we'd love to see you. So thank you everybody for coming out. Perhaps we can give our panelists again a round of applause. And we hope to see you at future Salazar events.